Hey there viewers, welcome back to another episode of Ray of All Trades. Today we're working on the Beast, the 2006 Chevy Silverado 1500 HD. It's got loose steering and some popping and creaking noises when you turn the wheel, driving really slow and you got to navigate and things like that. I have a hunch if it's what I think it is, you'll probably also see the symptom of driving along, hitting a pothole, and all of a sudden the steering will start shaking really bad. So let's get this thing jacked up and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, to check for steering problems, as opposed to suspension problems, you lift underneath the control arm, lower control arm. You support there to check for side-to-side steering problems. If you want to check for suspension problems, you would jack up underneath the frame support, so that all this is free floating, basically hanging. Then you can check your ball joints, upper and lower ball joints, by shaking the wheel up and down. But for this one, we're going to be shaking the wheel side to side, so you support underneath the lower control arm, and it loads the suspension. That way we can isolate tie rod, inner tie rod, Pitman arm, the idler arm, and idler arm bracket, which is over there. So let's shake this wheel and see what we see. So I see a tremendous amount of play coming from right here. So the Pitman arm that's connected to the steering gearbox, that joint there is loose. Very likely we have an idler arm problem too. I'm going to try to jack up the other side and try to isolate it. I don't hear any popping noises coming out of here, but I do see this moving back and forth. But that moving back and forth is usually from here, and I'm really hoping you guys are in frame so you can see what I'm talking about. So we're going to have to pull off this Pitman arm and replace that. Basically it's a ball and socket right there, but it's all attached to that one Pitman arm. Idler arm bracket and idler arm. Basically that's what attaches your steering components to the frame. So there's a joint right here, and then there's another joint back behind it, that both of those have an opportunity to wear out. I'm trying to get you guys in focus so you can see something. Try a couple different angles. Okay, so here's the thing with these. Not only do you have to deal with the rust, but this is the steering gearbox. This is your Pitman arm capture nut, lock washer there. Chevrolet, they did this for a whole bunch of years. They have a 3-spline and a 4-spline gearbox. So the only way to know is to take off this nut, lock washer, take a flashlight. Sometimes you can see how many splines there are. So it's a whole bunch of splines. What they're talking about is there's a keyway running around this thing. It's either got 3 or it's got 4, and obviously you can't buy the wrong one. Well, you can. The wrong one won't fit, so you have to go back and buy the right parts. So there's not a whole lot of room for taking this nut off without removing the actual gearbox. You can remove this gearbox from the outside. There's 3 of those, and you can loosen this gearbox up and you can move it out the way. If you can get that nut loose without having to remove this, you're a little bit better off, but that does speed up the process. Pulling off those 3 bolts, gearbox comes loose, you can put an impact on it and pull that nut off. It just gives you a better angle. But let's try to get this off just so we can see what size it is, and then we can get the right parts ordered. I don't have the right size wrench just to be able to pull off that nut, so I am going to have to pull the gearbox loose. Let's pull out this plastic clip. I've already loosened a couple of these off camera because I was trying to find the right size socket for it. There's so much rust on it that my 7/8 fits it, but it's just a little bit sloppy. mess with that in a minute. Let's pull this gearbox loose. Should be able to get a socket onto that nut now, because I can move this around and change angles. Some penetrating oil on those threads. I can't for the life of me figure out why some of these cans just stop spraying when they're in the vertical position. I can fix a lot of stuff, but that one just baffles me. Alright, so this nut back here is 21 millimeter. Should be 13/16. Let's pop that loose. I am going to put, just to see if it comes loose, because I'm going to change in all these pieces. I'm going to go ahead and just hit this with a hammer a couple times. What I'm trying to do is get this knocked loose so that I can move the gearbox to a spot where I can actually put the socket on it, the big 34 millimeter socket. Let me try to put a pickle fork in on that side, because I've already got this loose, so it's taking some of the vibration off. I should have taken this loose, busted this loose first and then taken the gearbox out, and we may have to end up going back that route. I just thought I was going to be able to get to this socket first. It's been a minute since I've done one of these. Let's jam a pickle fork up in there. Try to wheel away on that. Alright, let's get the tool that's made for it. Pitman arm, separator tool, press tool, shoot, I forget. I'll link it in the description. I've had this a while, and I think I've even modified it a little bit by shaving the sides down a little bit to make it fit one of the arms that was a little bit thicker than the others. Usually you can get these things under tension. Just give them a good smack and they'll free up. But occasionally you get one that's all rusted up like this one, and it's just that much harder. Just try to center it up a little bit better. She's not centering up real well. I do have a trick for this. Let me show you. What we're going to do is cut that flat. I'm just going to use an exhaust cutoff wheel, cut that flat so that the nut itself holds the press centered. Alright, so that's cut flat. So what I can do is back this nut off a couple of turns. It gives it a spot for that this dimple or this tit sticking out to drop into that hole. Center it up, give it some tension. starting to walk to an angle a little bit. Get that back centered. You can rent these pullers, these tools, usually from the auto parts store. But if you're like me, a lot of the tools that I rent, I end up not returning because I end up just buying them thinking I'm going to use them again. And this may have been one of them, I don't remember. No, I think this one came from Amazon, I'm almost positive. Okay, give it a lot of tension. Hopefully you guys got a chance to see the money shot. Because I don't know when it broke loose. I was just beating on it until I gave up. Just pull that nut off of there. Well, I beat the hell at the end of it, so I'm going to use the impact. Part that sucks here is I know I'm going to be ordering this part, so all this stuff I'm doing, I'm only setting myself up to have the truck sit here till Amazon delivers. Let's pull that loose. And so now the gearbox is loose. Now I can actually get to that nut a lot better. Let me drop it on there until I get my impact set up. So I pulled the gearbox back so that I can get to it from this angle. I thought I remembered I could get to it from the front, but it's not looking like I remembered correctly. At this point it's going to be really hot. Lock washer, nut, and then what the tool was really designed for was that piece. It should fit over like that, and then fit over like that. Hence the name Pitman Arm Puller. What I've noticed on these Chevrolets is that the tie rod, the I-arm bracket, and the Pitman arm all seem to go bad about the same time. And if you're under here changing one, change them all. This is truck's a perfect example of all of them being bad at the same time, but if you've only got one bad, there's a pretty good chance the other ones will be shortly after. I'm doing all this just so I can find out how many splines are on it. I might be able to see right now, but you guys were just out of shot. But what I was doing was hitting on here to try to loosen it up. So I'm gonna do the same sequence a couple more times. I'm gonna tighten this up, hit it a few more times, tighten it up. Well, never mind. Usually it takes half a dozen tries like that before it finally comes loose. This one happened to just come loose once. Hey, maybe it was my PB blaster. Sure, we'll say PB blaster helped on that one. Alright, so this is a 3 spline. Give me a second, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Inside here, there is something that's wider than the rest. There's a groove there. Well, you've either got 4 of those or you have 3 of those. And in my case, I have 3 of those. So if you had 4, obviously it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have to know what that is before you buy the new one, because if you had a 4 spline, obviously this wouldn't fit. So, and then part's actually bad here, and when it's out, you'll really have a hard time telling unless you put this in a vise. But this this stud has a ball on it. That ball is probably not worn out so much as the socket that it's sitting in is made of a different material. I want to say it has like a nylon inside it, and you're not going to know until you get it apart. They're all a little bit different. That's why it's so important to grease these things, so that that metal is not riding on that inner socket and wearing it out. That's where all that play is coming from. So it's doing the same thing on this one, the idler arm, which is very similar to this, and the idler arm bracket, which is a vertical piece. So let me get some parts and I'll get back with you guys. Okay, so parts arrived. First up is a Pitman arm. I'll link the parts in the description. It was, I think it was Detroit Axle was the brand that I received. Local parts houses were extremely expensive. I want to say the difference was like $300 difference roughly for these 3 parts in comparison to the local parts house. So pretty significant. Before I assemble this, let's make sure that I've got the 3 splines I was just talking about. And yep, 1, 2, 3 splines. Let's put the grease fitting on while we have access to it. So this one's running a 7mm. Okay, grease fitting goes in there just like that. Let's get this somewhere close to where it belongs, and the spline should line it up. Okay, let's get the gearbox up in place while we have slack to be able to do so. So I'm going to grab the 3 gearbox bolts, slide them through from the outside. So always start with getting one of them in place first. Okay, and tighten these up from the outside. Let's get that pin put back in. Alright, gearbox is in and tight. Alright, 7/8. Tighten it up until it lines back up with the hole so you can put the cotter pin in. Bend it back around like that. Just like that. Alright, so that's your Pitman arm. It's a complete replacement. We still need to grease here. We need to grease on top of here. Let's go ahead and get the idler arm stuff taken care of before we get too far though. Alright, let's go ahead and get this out while we can keep the idler arm intact. And we're going to pull it out completely. Then we'll pull off the idler arm as one big piece. The idler arm and the idler arm bracket as one big piece. So let's get this off first. Appears to be 7/8. We're probably going to use that exact same puller again. Let's try a pickle fork. We'll try a pickle fork to start. Alright. So we're going to cut this off again. I'm hoping you guys are on focus. We're going to cut this flat, put the nut on there, put the puller back on, and try to get it pulled off. Just give that something for the pivot point to lock into. There we go. Lock that in. There's the money shot. Alright, so pull this down and out the way. And of course the rain is coming down now. At least it's starting. Okay, I'm not sure when the camera died, but idler arm bracket, idler arm. What wears out is a lack of grease in here. It's a shoulder and socket. This comes down, has a ball on it. There's a socket in there. Grease actually lubricates that. And then also you've got some wear in here, and because I can spin this super easy, tells me it's probably got a lot of wear too. This one comes with a grease fitting relocator kit. This one's actually fairly easy to get to. It just suffered from neglect. So this is the relocator kit. They work good if you know that they're there and you look for them, because this right here gets bolted down by the lower control arm, and you have to know to look for it. So it's kind of a catch-22, you know. If you know it's there, great. If you don't, you don't know to look for it. So, okay, just tighten that up. And then we want to plug that one. Take that back. The other one was grease fitting on the side, and plug on this side. So let's put the grease fitting on this side, just like the old one was. Put the plug on the top side. I need to find out where the settings are in that camera that stops it from turning off when it thinks that there's no motion. But believe you me, there's lots of motion. I'm just not moving the camera. So out of the idler arm, grease fitting goes right there. Let's line these up. That one went like that, and then that went like that. Compared to the other one, so just like that. So if you can tell, sit just like that. So let's get this tightened up with another impact. Got my Ingersoll Rand. Get out my old trusty Ingersoll Rand. It's got the I over the R instead of the I next to the R. So I bought this off the Mack truck back in the 90s. Actually, I want to say it was 1990. Back when I was trying to turn wrenches. So 1 inch. Much stiffer. Okay, all we gotta do now, put this one back in, new cotter pin, and then grease the heck out of this thing. Alright, so for me it's top left and bottom right for orientation wise from my angle. Obviously yours may be different depending on where you're looking. Line the bolt holes up. Bolt goes through from the front to the back. Washer and a nut on the back side. There's a crown to the nut, faces to out. Same thing for the top one. It's called your idler arm bracket. For whatever reason, I think I might have mentioned this. Going to the big box stores all around, man. I've got about 5 of them within a mile. Great location. Would have been about $350 for those 3 pieces. I was able to get a decent brand that I've used several times on my personal stuff from Amazon for 60 bucks, next day delivery, something like that. So I'm not really sure why it costs so much, why there's that much of a discrepancy. Alright, had to loosen it up a little bit. I might have to loosen it up a lot of bit. Let's pull them 2 bolts back out. Okay, let's try this again. There we go. That goes on there. Castle nut next. Let's see if I can get that idler bracket in place. I'll use the bolt to try to get it turned in place. A little bit harder to do from that angle. Not terrible. Let's see if I can find all my parts now. On that side, washer. The nut was still attached to the wrench here. This other one's the one that got boogered up. Hopefully you guys can see me. Idler arm. I think it's a drag link, castle nut. Idler arm brackets up here. It's got 2 13/16 or 21 millimeter bolts coming from the front to the back. I had to put the idler arm in here first before I could put those in because I didn't have enough flex. It's very possible that if I jacked it up I had enough flex, I did not do that. This is a 7/8. Just tightening it up enough to where the cotter pin lines up all the way through. And that's it. Let's get these tools out of here, get some grease in this thing. One grease fittings right there on the top of the idler arm. We got that one. Okay, I don't know if you guys can see it. I greased the upper ball joints, the inner tie rods, obviously the new idler arm bracket, the idler arm. On the other side, the Pitman arm, inner tie rod, and the upper ball joint on that side. Lower ball joints don't look like they have grease fittings on this one, so I jacked it up underneath the jack point. I jacked it up underneath the jack point to check for steering. Remember, to check for ball joints, you would jack up underneath the frame here, and you would unload the steering. So right now I've got the steering loaded by jacking up underneath the lower control arm. Grab the wheel. Oh yeah, that's much tighter. There's no up and down play occurring up in this area. So 2006 Silverado. Applies to a whole bunch of years. It's a common Chevy truck problem. Idler arm, Pitman arm, and some of them have an idler arm bracket, some of them don't. Just look it up by your model. And there I am out here in the rain. You guys got anything out of the video, I really appreciate a thumbs up and a subscribe. Helps the channel tremendously. Doesn't cost you guys a dime, and that way you'll be notified whenever I post new content. Hey, thanks for hanging out, and catch you guys on the next one.